All right, I got a thumbs up. So I want to welcome everyone to our trauma-informed care workshop. My name is Dr. Navarrete, and I'm an adjunct professor here at Vanguard, and I teach in the Anti-Human Trafficking Certificate Program. I'm also I lead therapeutic groups and educational workshops with survivors of human trafficking at Alabaster Job Project, which is a nonprofit organization that provides resources and housing to survivors of sexual exploitation and human trafficking in San Diego County. I do have a booth set up, so feel free to check that out if you'd like to know some more information. And I'm really excited to share about trauma-informed care with you today because I feel like it's such a foundational skill when working and communicating with others, whether you work in healthcare, education, or you're in a faith-based organization, or you're a parent or a guardian. Several of our speakers have referenced trauma-informed care, so I'm glad that we get this opportunity to dive a little deeper. Many of you are not therapists or counselors, and yet you're working with people who've experienced trauma, and that affects your interactions with them and the effectiveness or the productivity of your work with them. And many trauma survivors may never seek mental health services, but they will go to school, they go to doctor visits, and they're part of a family. So you are in a unique position to be a healing source in their lives, even if that interaction is brief. I want to start with a quote by Ronald Sider, and it says, "No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And together we can change the world." So, caring for others from a place of compassion, empathy, and connection is something you can do, and it's something we can all do. And that's really what trauma informed care is all about. Here is the purpose and overview will be what we will be discussing today. So you know what's coming. We'll be defining trauma-informed care and discuss the core principles and discuss effects of trauma on the brain and behavior. And I don't want this workshop to just be theoretical. I want you to walk away today with some practical and tangible techniques that you can use from day one. So we'll talk about techniques for applying trauma-informed care in your work and in your community. And that's the first part of the workshop. And then we'll also watch and discuss some trauma-informed care scenarios that our theater department here at Vanguard have created for us. So there really isn't one single universal definition for trauma-informed care, but this is one that's commonly used. So trauma-informed care is a strength-based service delivery approach that is grounded in an understanding of and a responsiveness to the impact of trauma. That emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors, and creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. So this is more of a philosophy and an approach. Trauma-informed care, it begins from the moment the person walks in and informs every layer of our work with them, from the way the physical environment is set up to the way you interact, how you word the questions on your forms, to how you care for their needs. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, it's exactly what it sounds like. You are caring for someone or for a community, and it's being informed by your understanding of what trauma is and how it impacts people. So as someone else alluded during the conference, it's a shift away from asking, what's wrong with you, to instead asking, what happened to you in your life and how can we support you? So this perspective values seeing that person as a whole human being and not just those presenting problems that you might see before you. So we're going to go over some of the guiding principles of trauma-informed care. The first one is understanding trauma and its impact. So understanding traumatic stress and how it affects people, and recognizing that many behaviors and responses that may seem ineffective or unhealthy in the present actually represent adaptive responses to their traumatic experiences. So in other words, we see some of their problematic behaviors as something that actually helped them survive in that traumatic environment. And now that they're no longer in that environment, moving forward, we work on building new, healthier coping skills and adaptations. Our second one is promoting safety. So this is really important because for many trauma survivors, their sense of safety has been shaken at a very foundational level. So we want to establish a safe physical and emotional environment where their basic needs are met, safety measures are in place, and the responses that they're getting from their providers are consistent. The third is ensuring cultural competency. So, understanding how cultural context influences our perception of and our response to traumatic events and the recovery process. It's also about respecting and celebrating diversity within the program or the classroom, depending on what setting you're in, and supporting client control, choice, and autonomy. So, helping survivors regain a sense of control over their daily lives and build competencies that will strengthen their sense of autonomy. Number five is sharing power and governance. So, promoting an equalization of the power differentials between you and the survivor of trauma, sharing power and decision making, whether that's related to daily decisions or in the creation of the policies and procedures for your organization, if that's appropriate. And number six is integrating care. So maintaining a holistic view of clients or students and their process of healing and facilitating communication within and among service providers and systems of care. This is about bringing together our village, right, to support the trauma survivors' needs. Number seven is healing happens in relationships. So believing that establishing those safe and authentic and positive relationships can be corrective and restorative to survivors of trauma. In my work as a mental health specialist, I've had the honor of working with people who've experienced a wide variety of traumas, like from survivors of the genocide in Rwanda to orphaned kids and survivors of human trafficking. And a common thread is that trauma typically happens within the context of relationships. Therefore, healing must also happen within the context of reparative and positive relationships. Number eight is recovery is possible. So, understanding that recovery is possible for everyone, regardless of how vulnerable they may appear, just instilling hope, focusing on their strengths and resiliency, and focusing on those future-oriented goals. So our very first principle is understanding trauma and its impact. So we're going to take a deeper look at that. So according to SAMHSA, trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So traumatic events include things like physical abuse, rape, neglect, witnessing or experiencing violence, car accidents, or a sudden and unexpected loss. And these types of events can damage or undermine a person's sense of safety, their sense of self, and their ability to regulate their emotions and manage the relationships in their lives. And people who've experienced trauma also tend to feel unusually high levels of shame and a sense of helplessness and powerlessness. And of course, I do want to mention that a lot of people experience trauma and may not have these lasting effects. And it all depends on some of the resources that they might have in their life, and also some unique characteristics for them as well. But of course, we're speaking about this kind of in general. And I think it's helpful to have some basic understanding of how trauma affects the brain, because it sheds light on why we see the changes that we see in people who've experienced trauma. So according to neuroimaging, some of the main areas of the brain that are impacted by psychological trauma are the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. So here's a simplified image of the brain. You can see the brainstem at the bottom leading up to the hippocampus and the amygdala. And at the very front upper portion of the brain, we see the prefrontal cortex. So the brain develops in a back to front manner, which means that the prefrontal cortex is the last to develop and doesn't actually fully develop until about the age of 25 or so. And this prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain where the higher level thinking and executive functioning takes place. So things like learning new information, your personality, controlling impulses, planning for the future, or understanding the consequences of our actions, It's also responsible for managing those social behaviors in our life. And when someone's experienced trauma, and particularly repeated trauma, this part of the brain may be altered, and the fear centers of the brain, including the amygdala and the hippocampus, are activated. And this is when we see that, you may have heard, the fight, flight, or freeze response, or what we sometimes call stress response takeover. And this is an automatic physiological reaction to an event, and is perceived that's perceived as threatening, and can create a series of physiological changes. So things like, our heart rate increases, your breathing speeds up, and your pupils actually dilate and to let in more light so you can see better, and your hearing becomes sharper. It really, it actually prepares your body for injury, like your blood thickens. There's all these amazing things that just happen automatically. You may sweat more. And then, also there's a lot more blood being sent to the major muscles in your body. So your hands and your feet might get cold. And this fight or flight response even reduces like your perception of pain. So all of these things happen instantly and automatically without us even thinking about it. And this, like I said, it's pretty amazing, because if you think about how our body is created in a way to keep us safe and keep us alive in these dangerous situations. You may have experienced, some of these feelings, like slamming on the brakes when the car in front of you suddenly stops, or jumping out of the way of an oncoming vehicle. One simple way that I like to refer to these two states of mind is the learning brain mode, or when that prefrontal cortex is activated and engaged, versus that survival brain mode, when the fear centers of the brain and that fight or flight response is activated and engaged. So it's important to understand how learning brain mode and survival brain mode interact. First of all, these two modes can't really function at the same time. And the survival brain always trumps the learning brain. And that makes sense, right? Because at the most basic level, your brain is just trying to save your life and keep you alive. So if it perceives something dangerous or life threatening, it will make you pay attention to that first. The tricky thing is that when the survival brain is more frequently engaged, as we often see in people who've experienced repeated trauma, it becomes harder to turn that off. It's like your brain creates like a shortcut to it. And as a result, it gets harder and harder to go back into learning brain mode. So this is why people who have experienced significant or repeated trauma often misperceive situations that are ambiguous or neutral as threatening and stressful, and may react with anger or resistance, have more difficulty with learning and concentration, or social difficulties. And because that survival brain mode is being triggered very easily. This also helps explain why we tend to see, a higher concentration, like more difficulties with drug and alcohol use in people with a history of trauma, because they're using these substances to alleviate some of those physical symptoms of the stress response that are overactivated. The good news is that research on neuroplasticity, which is that the brain's capacity to continue growing and evolving in response to life experiences, has shown us that just as traumatic events can forge those neural pathways and shortcuts to survival mode or survival brain mode, positive, constructive, therapeutic experiences can also help people cope, heal, and build the healthy pathways. So, and this creation of new pathways can happen throughout our lives. So it's not just when we're young. So our brain continues growing throughout our life and changing. So our goal when we're working or teaching or parenting someone with a history of trauma is to get them out of that survival brain mode and into a learning brain mode where they can feel safe, connected, engaged, and build and strengthen those positive experiences and relationships. Something else that taught us a lot about the effects of trauma is ACEs, which you guys have heard before, or there's been other speakers who've spoken on it, and it stands for the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And the findings from the study suggested that certain adverse childhood experiences, like child abuse, household members using alcohol or drugs, domestic violence, are major risk factors, not only for future psychological difficulties, which we kind of knew, right, like suicidality, depression, etc., but also for the leading causes of health outcomes, things like mortality from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer. It also revealed that trauma experiences in childhood are extremely common, right? So much more common than we had originally thought. So about 61% of adults reported they had experienced at least one type of ACE, and nearly 1 in 6 reported that experienced 4 or more ACEs. So this highlights the importance of us becoming more aware of how trauma impacts those around us and also what we can do to help. So people exposed to trauma, and particularly chronic trauma from an early age, can develop these survival strategies that are often misinterpreted and can be frustrating for people around them. But these behaviors often make sense in the context of their experiences. So as a psychology professor, I always like challenging my students to become more aware of how our perspective, things we've learned, and they influence the way we see and interpret situations, right? Kind of like a pair of glasses that we wear, and with lenses that color how we see things and interpret the world around us. So as we learn new information, we can begin to see and interpret things through this new lens of deeper understanding. So today, I want you to imagine that we see the problematic behaviors on the left-hand column through our trauma glasses. So, and then we're going to consider the role that trauma may be playing and how a person is behaving. So with our trauma glasses off, we might see attention-seeking behaviors. But once we put them on, we realize that they may be feeling disconnected, alone, unheard by others, or looking for attention. They may be disrespectful, but we realize they're actually feeling threatened, unsafe, or out of control. Manipulative. They're getting their needs met in the ways it has worked in the past for them, doing whatever is necessary to survive. You might see behavior that you might think is, maybe lazy. They may be overwhelmed or lacking the skills to make decisions about what to do first or to organize. They may appear unmotivated, but they may be depressed, fearful, overwhelmed, or frozen. They may be resistant, but with our trauma glasses on, we see that they may be mistrustful of others due to a history of being hurt by others, scared to make progress, and then lose everything. And finally, we have destructive and uncontrollable, but they may actually be having a hard time self-regulating, or they may have been triggered. So, I have one example of a woman that I worked with who was a survivor of human trafficking. And she came home one day to the home, and she said, I wasn't able to get my medical appointment taken care of because I refused to wear a mask, and I refused to wear a mask. And so, all the other, some of the other people in the home were like, just put your mask on. Everybody's got to do it. We're going through a pandemic. But it wasn't until after I sat with her and spoke with her and we talked about what that meant to her, we realized that it was actually triggering her memories of having her mouth and her nose covered, and being, like forms of violence that were used against her by preventing her from being able to breathe. And so basically anything on her face was kind of triggering that for her. So, it's just important to recognize that often there is so much more there than what we're seeing at the surface. So now that we've talked about some of the effects of trauma, let's talk about some of the things that we can do. So how do we create more trauma-informed environments and interactions that promote those feelings of safety and empowerment and autonomy? Here's some suggestions. So for the physical and emotional environments, things like signage, right? You might not think of that necessarily, but is the wording framed as what you can do versus what you can't do? So for example, if you're a teacher, you might say, please use your quiet voices, or walking feet instead of no yelling or no running. And then your welcome areas, are your welcome areas welcoming and friendly and comfortable, with comfortable furniture and maintenance that's up to date? So does it promote that feeling of being valued and safe? And are you displaying culturally appropriate symbols like culturally diverse posters and artwork? And just a note about artwork, is the artwork displayed calming to most people? So abstract artwork, for example, has been found to be triggering for some trauma survivors because it can be interpreted in different ways. And we often kind of project what's going on inside of us, right, onto things that are kind of ambiguous. And then seating arrangements can help provide safety as well. So for example, they may feel safer if they're not seated too close to others, or have access to the exits, for example. Providing routines, schedules, structure, and rules that remain predictable, and having a strength-based perspective. So this is a perspective that places the strengths and the resources of that person rather than their problems and or their pathologies at the center of the helping process. And it emphasizes the human capacity for resiliency. And finally, creating an environment where there's engagement around that person's goals and needs, right? So if that environment, everybody there is focused on helping that survivor. Now, trauma-informed interaction. So provide interactions which are honest and transparent and respectful. And by transparency, I'm referring to things like, if we're in healthcare or in other settings as well, are there any costs associated with their services? And specific information about what procedures will entail, kind of a step-by-step, can be helpful. And continually seeking feedback regarding that survivor's experience. So asking things like, what helps you when you or your child are upset? Remember, they are the experts. So things like, what was successful in the past? What are the triggers? What can we do? And give them opportunities to label and express their emotions, reactions, and thoughts. So for kids, this may be giving them language for expressing their emotions. And there's so many creative ways that so many creative tools to help kids express their emotions, right? Like color charts and faces and things like that you can access online, or Pinterest is a great resource too. Provide developmentally appropriate degree of power, choice, and control. So providing opportunities for choice is something that is applicable in most settings. So I really like this one, from choices in, like food options to choices in the activities they participate in, being able to choose kind of the personal goals that they'll be working on. Even pretty basic or minor choices can begin to build their sense of autonomy. And that's something that's really important, because part of the trauma experience has been a feeling of loss of control and choice. So we want to do the opposite, right? And have it be a corrective experience of empowerment. And begin and end with positive activities. One example of this could be a morning meeting, for example, for teachers to do in their classrooms, which is a time to check in with all the students, or do a calming activity together. And I know teachers are very overwhelmed, and so are parents right now, right? And they already have like this long checklist of things to get through. But one way to see this is that it's not something added to their plate. It is the plate that carries the learning that will take place throughout that day. So we are trying to make sure kids are in that learning brain mode right before we get started, and that they're ready to learn and to interact with their peers in a good way. And create a safe space. So this can be a safe space, in your home. This can be a safe space at work or in the classroom. And it's basically a place where people can go to if they're feeling overwhelmed. So for children, for example, you can have an hourglass timer that is set for 5 minutes when they turn it over, or any kind of timer really. And you can have objects that promote relaxation or safety, like printout reminders to take a few deep breaths or do some stretching, or, fidget spinners, or you can have headphones there with some relaxing music that they can listen to for a few minutes. The rocking motion of a swing or rocking chair can also be helpful, like, things like a cozy blanket or a plush toy for kids to hug, or having essential oils to smell available there. And finally, teach some basic relaxation techniques and discuss a plan for how and when those will be implemented. So, things like deep breathing or grounding exercises. I think this should happen in classrooms and even organizations right from day one, because I think we could all benefit from just acknowledging when we need to step away and take a few deep breaths when necessary. And before we end this portion of the workshop, I did want to briefly discuss trauma-informed care at the organizational level, because I think one of the biggest challenges to working from a trauma-informed perspective is working alongside colleagues or organization or even a co-parent who is not working from a trauma-informed perspective. You know, if we could all work from this common ground, I think people would have so much more productive work going on and so much more success in the recovery from trauma. And I think it begins with starting conversations with coworkers and leadership regarding trauma-informed care and how you can apply these principles in your everyday work. Collaboration is key, like whether you're working with families, staff, or community partners, or even between different systems of care. Make sure everyone is speaking the same language, and there's support from leaders in your system. It's important to be aware that change does take time. This is a paradigm shift in the culture and way of thinking. So it may not happen overnight, and everyone is at a different starting point, right, in their understanding of trauma informed care. And, I think it's important for everyone to have a baseline understanding of trauma informed care, even those who are not directly providing services. So, like janitorial staff, security, administrative assistants, everyone interacting in that environment, because they may play a role in triggering someone's trauma response, even when that's not their intention. And finally, it's not a one size fits all framework, right? There are common core principles like the ones we talked about, but how we apply them will depend on the setting or the system you're working within and the historical, cultural context. So it might take some time and thought to figure out how it can be best applied in your specific setting. And I've included a list of some resources if you'd like to learn more, including some books and some websites where you can find more information. Some of them are catered a little bit more towards education, others towards the healthcare system. And on these websites, you can find, and also some websites down below, but and a lot of these provide like tools and training and further trainings for trauma-informed care. And I will have this presentation available on the Whova, so you can access this at a later time. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our scenarios that our theater department have put together for us. I'm really excited to share these with you, and I really want to applaud the students who did these, because they really found creative ways to work around filming these with the pandemic and social distancing restrictions. So make sure you're watching these scenarios with your trauma-informed glasses on, because I'll be asking you some questions after each video. And these scenes follow a young girl named Madison at 3 different windows of time. So the first one takes place during a Zoom class session.
And when you're finished with pages 57 through 59, please turn those in on Canvas. Following that, you can have a break until 10:50, and after the break, we will continue to work on—
Told you, Mom, it's fine. I gotta go to school.
Madison, please mute your microphone.
Yes, Mom, I know. Don't worry about it.
Madison, you need to mute yourself. You're disrupting the class, which you were already late to. Okay, everyone, please continue working on your assignments.
Mrs. Parks, what are we supposed to be doing?
Madison, if you had been here when class started, you would know that we're working on the assignments on pages 57 through 59. Seriously, Madison, you're a smart girl. You need to put in more effort if you want to pass this class. I don't know what's so important that you can't manage to log into Zoom, but this is school now, and you need to make an effort.
Forget this. What Mrs. Parks doesn't know is that just getting on Zoom is so hard. Both of my parents lost their jobs in restaurants since the COVID pandemic. My grandma, who lived with us, recently just died. My mom cries all the time, and my dad, well, he just drinks. Sometimes it's not so bad. Sometimes he gets really angry, and he's been hitting my mom. It's like all this pain and rage is focused on her, and it's not fair. As the oldest daughter, I know I need to help my mom, but I don't know what to do. I try to help my mom more with my little brothers and with cooking just to give her a break. Haven't been sleeping at night either because I can hear my parents arguing and arguing, and I'm always afraid that my dad will get so mad that he'll start hitting my mom again. It's just been so hard to focus lately. School just doesn't seem important anymore, and it's not like I get to see my friends. No one even knows what I'm going through or seems to care, except maybe Tony, this guy I met online. He started following me and then we started texting. He's the only one who gets me now.
All right. So I did want to ask if you could have it be a little interactive during this part of the presentation and kind of just in the chat box enter what your thoughts are. What are your reactions initially after watching that video? What did you notice or what stood out to you? And if we can just, as they come in, if we could read some of those out loud.
I'm going to wait for some answers to come in, but I guess I'll start and just noticing the teacher, I think, probably not intentionally minimizing what a home environment might look like and assuming that it is a perfect study environment, quiet and able to focus, things like that. So unintentionally minimizing basically her environment, what's going on for the student.
Okay. Okay, great. And and feel free to also comment on what you maybe could have done differently, also in that situation, and or what are some of the signs that maybe she could have picked up on to suggest that there was more going on for her at home.
I'm seeing someone else say that having a community is so important for students.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Someone else says, as a teacher, I thought about times that I may have responded in a similar way without considering the students' experiences at home.
And we've all been there, right? Whether it's with people at work or our students or our kids, we've all certainly been there.
I see another chat saying the teacher could have noticed the conversation the girl was having with her mom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what could maybe she have done differently as far as, are there any steps that she could have taken at this point after making those observations? Anybody has any comments on that?
Okay, we have quite a few more comments pouring in now that we're going to step away a little bit from your question, but we'll come back to it if someone does answer with what they would have done. I see someone else noticing Madison showed signs of being overwhelmed before logging off, so feeling really overwhelmed. Someone else is saying she's internalizing her thoughts and feelings, and that's what's causing her to lash out on screen with her teacher. The teacher could have pulled her aside or asked her to sign off for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else says, I think the teacher maybe did not need to add the remarks, adding on she's late or maybe showing her disappointment towards the student.
Mm-hmm.
And one more, the teacher can support her with compassion while she's in class and check in with her one-on-one after class.
That's excellent. Yeah. So I think, several of you commented on making that connection one-on-one, right? To find out what's really going on. What is this about? Possibly even reaching out to the family and finding out if there are resources available that they can be connected to in order to help with that situation. So great job, guys. So let's move on to our second video. And during this video, you can start.
When you're finished with pages 50.
And during the next video, feel free to start placing any comments already in the text. Anything you're observing, things you think could have happened differently, anything like that.
Hi, Madison. Sir, you just over there while I take the medicine. Whoa, it looks like you got a nasty cut above your eye. Let me take a look. Whoa, you got some bruising around your neck and under your chin. How did that happen?
Oh, I guess I fell and I landed on my neck. And then I cut my eye, I think. I don't know. I'm sorry. I passed out, so I don't really remember. I'm sorry. It feels like I can't breathe or something.
Oh, you're fine. You're just getting a little worked up. Just try to calm down. Are you drinking now, teacher? It says here you're only 18.
Oh, I guess I just tripped.
Well, if you were drinking, I hope you learned your lesson and will be more careful in the future. Alright, let's get you stitched up. I'll be right back with some supplies.
What the nurse didn't know is that Tony was really nice to me at first. He really treated me well. I was having a hard time because of my family and school. He really took care of me and bought me a new outfit, took me out to get my nails done. He made me feel so beautiful, like I was the center of his world. But he hasn't been himself lately. He asked me to do something for him that I didn't feel comfortable doing. I didn't want to and said no at first, but he had done so much for me that I wanted to make him happy. I feel so ashamed. I don't feel like I could ever tell anyone what I did. I never thought that he would ever do anything like that. He asked me to do it again, and I said no, and I made him so mad that he started hitting me and even strangling me. He told me that if I didn't do that thing, the next time he asked me, that he would tell my friends and family what I had done. He said he was sorry for hitting me and that he would never do it again. I don't know if he will ever forgive me. I don't know what to do. Maybe if I had a minute alone with the nurse, I could get the courage to tell her. No, I can't do that. I don't think she would believe me. And I can't imagine what she would think of me if she found out what I did.
So what are your thoughts or reactions to this scene?
So this was a comment actually put on the very end of scenario 1, but I think that it really ties greatly into scenario 2. It says she has no one to help her or even check up on her. She's being treated as an adult, which I feel like speaks to how she might have been vulnerable to get into a situation like this after scenario 1.
Right, right. So, and we, we're seeing things like a lack of empathy, right? And some judgment calls, with the comment about the alcohol. And so as you saw in that video, Madison didn't feel comfortable. She thought, what would she think of me, right? If she knew what happened or if I told her. So there's kind of that sense of, okay, this is not a safe person probably to share something else that might be hard to share with, right? So, and this scene kind of reminds me of, in my experience working with survivors, so several of them had said, I did multiple visits to urgent care or to the ER, and there were so many times where I could have told somebody in that situation or at that time, but I just didn't feel comfortable. Or, and it was kind of hard to tell in the scene, again, because of our distancing restrictions. But Madison did come in with her, with her boyfriend and trafficker. And so, something that I've been told over and over again by survivors of trafficking is, the trafficker sent somebody with them, and they never kind of took the time to say, can I just speak with you alone for a few minutes, and kind of giving her that space to share something if they did have something to share. So are there any other comments?
Yes, we have quite a few. Would you like me to address them one at a time or list them off?
You can just say a few you think that are most relevant, maybe. Okay. I'm sure they're all relevant, but just maybe pick a few.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just reading through and someone's echoing exactly what you just touched on. The nurse quickly moved past her story and could have asked the guy to step out of the room to be alone. Someone else says that the nurse should have known the signs of her injuries and asked to speak with her.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, her injuries didn't really align with her report, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have someone else that says she's been convinced she is to blame for the abuse that she endured.
Mm-hmm. Now, how could she have provided more trauma-informed care? Go ahead and comment on that. What could she have done? And I'll point out a few while we're kind of waiting. One of the things that we talked about that can be really relevant in this medical setting is providing that choice whenever possible, and explaining to her kind of exactly, what the procedure will look like pretty exactly. Even if providing choice can be in the small things, like, are you comfortable? Do you want me to sit you up or lay you down a little bit? Would you like any water? Or, is it okay if I touch your face? Is it okay if I examine you, right? So making sure that you're asking first, and or if anything ever feels uncomfortable, you can raise your hand up and I'll stop right away. There's so many things that we can do to just introduce some sense of control and some sense of choice.
Yeah, to follow up, I'm seeing a couple suggestions here that are great. The nurse didn't create a safe space. The nurse could have taken more time to listen to her compassionately, and that may have made her feel safe to share.
Mm-hmm.
And the nurse was quick to invade her space, which is what you were touching on before, without really asking if she was comfortable.
Right. That's great. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our third and final scene. So in this scene, Madison was exploited and now is kind of out of that bad situation, is receiving services at a nonprofit organization. And in this scene, she's having a Zoom session with a volunteer, and they're working on some recreational activities. And feel free during the video at any point to start, making some comments about, what maybe could have gone differently, or, what went wrong, any observations you might have.
Yes, that's it. Just fold it here and open this part, and there you go.
Oh, that's cool. Can we make another one?
Sure, Madison. I'm really glad I could come this week and volunteer. I've been so busy trying to help organize the fundraiser for a safe home. We hope to raise a lot of money so that more girls can benefit just like you did. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, I guess so.
Well, so I was wondering if maybe you could help us out. You have made so much progress. You were like a totally different person than when you first got here. I was hoping if you could tell your story at the fundraiser, so people would know how great the Safe House is and give their money to support more girls like you.
Well, I don't really like public speaking, so
Well, that's okay. I could teach you. I am really good at speeches. We could just tell the people what you've been through, about your trafficker and how he beat you and how you were rescued, and how the Safe House has helped you. What do you think? I know the people just love you.
Oh, well, my boyfriend didn't beat me, but I don't know if I do a good job.
Oh, just promise me you'll think about it, okay?
I really don't want to talk about what happened to me, especially not to a bunch of people I don't even know. They'll just be staring at me.
judging me. How would you like to tell a room full of strangers about your worst day or the stupidest thing you've ever did? But the people in this program have done so much for me. So maybe I should just do it, even though I really don't want to. I'm trying to say no, but she doesn't seem to be listening. I wonder if she'll be mad or disappointed with me if I don't do it. And why does she keep calling Tony my trafficker? I know he did some pretty bad things, but he was there for me when no one else was. And he said he was sorry. I still love him. And I think he still loves me too. My heart is racing, and I feel really out of it right now. What is going on with me? I feel like running out of here. These people are really nice, and I know they're trying to help me, but I think they just don't get me. Maybe this program isn't the right place for me. I should have known that. I just don't belong.
All right. So what are there any thoughts, comments so far?
Yes, we have a lot of great comments coming in. The first one I'm seeing is she's forcing a timeline on a victim's story.
Mhm. Mhm.
I see someone else saying it's not relational. It's all about benefiting the organization.
Right.
Another one here about using the language of the client, of the victim, that boyfriend versus trafficker.
Yes, I think that is a great observation because sometimes, they're still at a place where there's confusion about that relationship and what it all meant and, how to make sense of that. So I think that's a really great point. And one thing I also wanted to point out was, do you think Madison felt empowered in this situation? Probably not, right? Because the volunteer was kind of speaking to, everything the agency had done for her, and how great that was, and how she was rescued, right? And really not speaking to Madison's strength and giving her credit for, where she's come, the progress that she's made and her bravery for even being there. And so it seems like the attention and the power and the praise is going to kind of things outside of Madison and not herself. Any other comments?
Yeah, I see quite a few other comments really aligning with what you're saying, this idea of it really feeling transactional,
Mm-hmm.
Exploitative, a lot of pressure, feeling unsafe, rather than touching more on the empowerment you were talking about.
Right. And there were comments made like, I'm a really good presenter, right? And I'll help you, and things like that, that again are taking a lot of the power away from, the survivor and into the hands of the provider. So it's important that, we be trauma informed and also strengths based, right? Where we're focusing on the strengths of the survivor. And, all of these scenes, we're able to see kind of, or in these three scenes, we're able to see kind of that process, right, of somebody becoming vulnerable or at risk and then being exploited, and how sometimes unintentionally they are re-victimized, or put in a situation of being re-victimized, even if that's not their, people can be very, very well intentioned. But I think that's why it's important for us to become, more informed and more aware of kind of some of the parallels that we might draw, right? Because we can kind of see also, an observation that I wanted to point out was for Madison, there seemed to be almost kind of a little bit of a parallel in the place that she was put in that volunteer scene, where she's being pressured into doing something she doesn't feel comfortable doing, and she feels pressured because of all the things that the organization has already done for her. And so it's, even if we don't intend to, sometimes we find ourselves kind of kind of in a situation where it kind of parallels some of the abuse that they went through, and it can be triggering for them. So and then I want to pause here so that we can have some time for questions.
Yes.
There we go.
As the questions roll in, I'm actually really curious if you could speak on back to what you were saying about that corrective emotional experience, like a new experience with these victims, and how that ties in with neuroplasticity, being able to change the brain over time.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I think, like when we talked about the way that our brain basically, grows and changes and, basically is wired by the way that our environment, the experiences that we have in our environment. Sometimes I like to think of it as kind of, I live out in the country and it rains really hard out here, and drainage is always a major issue, right? And that when there's kind of a path that keeps getting used over and over again, it can really build these deep grooves. And it's the same thing with our brain. It works with associations. So when we have these negative experiences and these negative events in our life, our brain says, okay, let's prepare, for this situation. Let's make sure that we are ready in case we're in danger again. And so it can take time for us to say, okay, no, we don't need to take that path of this is going to be a dangerous situation. We're going to build, we're going to go back to that less taken road right now, which is that pathway to this can be a safe relationship. This can be a loving relationship, and I can be vulnerable. I don't have to be afraid. And the more you build that, and the more they're able to experience positive relationships, the more they're getting their sense of like, what, not everybody is here to benefit from me. Not everybody is here to take advantage of me. And so that's one of the things that we work on, like one of the groups that I run is cognitive behavioral therapy. And so we talk about, what are the things that we assume, right? What are our belief systems and about relationships and about the world? And one of them is that everybody is out to get you. And so let's talk about what's a more accurate or more realistic view to have. And let's put that to, let's test that out, and kind of reframing that idea that, not everybody is safe, but there are some people who are safe and who are kind, and we need to build those relationships. And so the more you build that positive relationship and interactions, they begin to realize that, hey, I can have positive relationships, and I can, and not everybody's trustworthy, but there are people who are trustworthy, and I need to work on those and focus on those.
That's really great. Thank you. I'll head over to the next question here from Rachel. We see, are there certain words or phrases to avoid when caring for someone in this way? Like certain phrases that might be a trigger.
Mm-hmm. I think, I feel like the video kind of showed a couple of those that I really liked. Some of the women that I've worked with are still struggling with understanding what that relationship was with their trafficker. And so being careful to not speak negatively of the trafficker or not use that word. And instead, speaking using whatever language they use for them, because I have noticed that is a quick shutdown, right? Because they're not at a place where they're seeing it that way yet. And then also, anytime that they feel like basically cornered into making choices, making decisions, being told not, what not to do. And there are so many settings where you do need to have structure, you need to have rules, you need to take away their phones, or, situations like that. But I think whenever it's done from a place of, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. What do you think? Here are our concerns for your safety. Here are concerns for everybody's safety in the home. And this is something we have to ensure. So what do you think is a good plan for that? How can we go about that? And interestingly, you almost always end up at a very similar place, right? When like you think, okay, we need to take away phones, we need to have curfew, we need to have all this stuff. And that might just seem like it's being imposed on them. But when you actually sit with them and say, what do you think? How can we keep everyone safe? How can we make sure, people are home at a certain time? And what time do you think is reasonable? Often you actually reach a very similar conclusion, but when they're a part of that development of those policies and those procedures, that can be very empowering for them. So I think anytime that you introduce, what do you think about that? Let's sit down and talk about it. Let's come up with it together.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I'm seeing a couple questions with this theme of just how to create an even safer environment, helping empower when someone might already be mistrusting towards others, based on what you were talking about in the previous question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I think safety is one of those, like we talked about in the presentation. It's about being in an environment where it wasn't safe, right? For them to be mistrustful of somebody or of an authority figure, that's adaptive for them. So that's a strength, right? That is a skill that they had to pick up on. And so I think the that safety, when we think of Maslow's hierarchy of need or any of that, that it really comes down to the core, right? To the very basic. And until you establish that, like nothing else can really be built on top of that. So I think making sure that they know, hey, we're a teamwork, we're going to do this together. I'm here to listen, asking open-ended questions, and be listening more than you are speaking. I think all of those can be helpful, and also just increasing like the amount of positive activity time you have with them. So sometimes we can show up and be like, okay, we're here to do this or we're here to do that activity, but making sure that you're also investing some time into saying, okay, we're just going to do some positive activity, where it's not me trying to get you to um, do something that needs to happen today. We're just simply going to spend time together, and I'm going to listen, and you're going to be a part of this process with me.
Great, thank you. As we wrap up, just ask one more quick question. Someone's asking the difference between trauma-informed care and how that might compare to crisis intervention.
Okay, that's a good question. So I think trauma-informed care is something that can happen kind of throughout the treatment process, right? Whether someone is coming in crisis, or it's somebody who's in the healing journey and is far along and made progress in their healing journey. Whereas crisis, I think, is, obviously it's when somebody's coming in and they need kind of that immediate sense of safety and security, and making sure that whatever dangers that what put them in that situation, that they're out of that. Whereas as opposed to trauma-informed care, where I think it's something that you can apply even at the grocery store, right? I mean, it's something that I think can kind of happen throughout like the different settings and different environments. But I think that trauma-informed care is a part of kind of that crisis intervention as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, your insight and everything. And I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone that we appreciate that too. So thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you for the next event.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending.